Hello everyone, Storm One here. Today we'll be talking about the significant severe weather potential that's going to be existing tomorrow across central and western Kentucky. We got more severe weather threats after that, and then there's going to be increasing threat for flooding, including major aerial and river flooding out there, as well as we can see potentially historic rainfall amounts over the next several days. There's a lot to get into. We're going to first get started with the watch warning advisory display across the country. It is becoming more active. You got winter weather across the north and west, high wind issues across parts of the plains, including fire weather. And then, meanwhile, here in Kentucky, we got two different alerts out there. The counties that are highlighted in tan is a wind advisory, and those are wind gusts that could be anywhere from 40 to 50 miles an hour, and I can rule out some isolated gusts, maybe trying to push 55 out there. But wind gusts generally 40 to 50 miles an hour is expected tomorrow. And then we have a flood watch that's out there, and here's a look at that flood watch. No changes to the flood watch since yesterday. We already have river flood warnings starting to show up in western Kentucky, and that's probably going to be out ahead of those strong severe storms that is expected tomorrow out there. And here's the SPC outlook for today. Got an enhanced risk for severe weather across parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. That's been expanded a lot since yesterday. And the potential is there for some strong tornadoes in the Hatched area, which would include even the Oklahoma City area. Damaged winds could be some destructive winds up towards Kansas and even almost to Kansas City. And a very large hail can also be in play out there. And then day two, which is tomorrow, got a moderate risk that is out for western Kentucky, southwestern Indiana, southern Illinois, and it even extends to northeastern Arkansas into western Tennessee, with the enhanced risk continuing across parts of central Kentucky out there. And here's a closer view here of the moderate risk, and you can see how that moderate risk includes mainly areas west of I-65. It does include places like Owensboro, Madisonville, Paducah, Murray, Mayfield, Beaver Dam out there. So quite a few communities out there within that moderate risk, and the enhanced risk has actually been cut back quite a bit here. It now only gets to, looks like, just about along the Highway 68 corridor out there. It does include Bowling Green, Lexington, Louisville, Frankfort, all the way up into Cincinnati. Even Maysville is included in that enhanced risk, and that's where we may see potential for some significant severe weather. But the risk in those areas may be more conditional, and I'll answer that question why here in a moment. And then across eastern Kentucky, it's more of a marginal to slight risk, but I can see this being cut back more. I think trends are going down for, especially for southeastern Kentucky out there. And once again, I'll explain that why in a few moments. And this is a tornado-driven moderate risk. Areas that moderate risk has a 15% chance of seeing tornadoes 25 miles of any given point. There's even that Hatched area, which indicates the potential for strong tornadoes, and I think we can see some strong long-track tornadoes out there. So that's going to be a big concern, especially if we have discrete supercells out there, which I think we can, unfortunately, we'll see a couple of those across western Kentucky. Damage winds is another threat. Could be some significant damage winds in the Hatched area. That means winds that could be greater than 75 miles an hour. So the potential is there for some destructive winds. And for hail, I think the greatest hail risk is going to be west of I-65. It decreases the farther east you go, because probably as soon as it gets west of I-65, should be a squall line by that point. But there is some room for changes out there. There's some complexity for areas along and east of I-65 out there, and that's what we're going to kind of explain here. So we're going to look at the latest run of the HRRR model run, You can see some discrete supercells that kind of goes through parts of Kansas and Oklahoma. Those storms will be capable of producing all hazards. They should die out as you get into tonight. And then as we kind of wake up into Wednesday here, and you can start to see here the HER model is trying to show a couple of cells out there. We got to keep a close eye on those, because if we do get a couple of discrete supercells well out ahead of the main area thunderstorms, which you can see it's still way back in Missouri and Arkansas. If we do see discrete supercells well out ahead of that area thunderstorms or severe storms, we're going to have some problems. The conditions will be very favorable for all hazards out ahead of that line. But as we get deeper into Wednesday evening here, we can start to see our cluster of thunderstorms starting to take shape as they approach western Kentucky. This may still be in more of a broken line of storms by this point here. And if that's going to be the case, that can actually enhance potential for strong tornadoes. And usually you have a high probability of strong tornadoes with supercells than you do with squall lines. So, and some of America's most violent tornadoes have occurred in supercells and not in squall lines. Very unusual to have intense tornadoes along squall lines out there. But so you can start to see here the HER model is trying to suggest a couple of discrete storms developing out ahead of that line. And those would be the ones to watch very closely here. And you can see as you get deeper into Wednesday evening, by this point here, the wind energy is starting to increase more, so which can help organize the storms more out there. And you can see eventually at some point Wednesday evening, this should turn into a full-blown squall line. You're probably going to see some widespread damage winds with some destructive winds out there. And there will be some tornadoes along that line as well. But you can start to see, as it crosses I-65, you start to notice how those storms trend weaker. And because of the timing of the storms here, as it gets east of I-65, there's not going to be as much instability to work with out here. They're kind of running out of instability when they get east of I-65. However, if they do arrive earlier, which is what happened last time with Sunday storms, models trended an hour or two earlier, which makes a big difference. For example, at this range for Sunday storms, it had storms arriving Louisville at about 2 a.m. With the models trending quicker, the storms actually arrived before 10 o'clock in Louisville. And that kind of makes a big difference. We'll see if it happens again this time around. If it does, then we can certainly see some of that significant severe weather kind of continuing a little bit east of I-65. Probably these areas here I've circled in red. Probably as far east as the 127 corridor out there. But eventually as they reach I-75, they should really start to weaken by that point, if that scenario does play out. But the latest HER model run shows more of a slower solution, and you can see what happens when they cross I-65. They weaken. I mean, we'll probably still have a decent amount of severe thunderstorm warnings even as those storms cross I-65, but it probably won't be as intense compared to west. So that's why we have the moderate risk west of I-65, and you see a pretty good downgrade of risks, category of risks, the farther south and east that you go out there. And then eventually, as we wake up Thursday morning, the front begins to stall out here. And really along and south of that boundary is where we'll have to pay close attention for more strong severe storms for later today on Thursday out there. So let's talk a little more in depth with this area. Let's look at the 500 millibar winds, and really it hasn't changed. It's still the same here. We're out ahead of the trough out here, which is usually the area favored for severe weather, and this is typically the area that you will look for severe weather as well. And with us being in this area here, it would help bring more wind energy for the storms, but it can also create more lift in wind shear in the atmosphere, which can help maintain those storms as well. So we got the 500 millibar winds, so that's a check mark. If we look at to the low of a jet, which is 850 millibars, really throughout all day Wednesday will be favorable. Now, if you want to compare to Sunday storms, we have low of a jet winds anywhere from 30 to 40 knots. And you see what that did. We had damaging winds, we had several tornadoes, we even had a long track EF1 tornado that went by Fort Knox. This event here, we're talking about winds that could be anywhere from 60 to 70 knots. So winds are going to be stronger for tomorrow's setup compared to Sunday, which is why the ceiling is higher. We're going to have more wind shear to work with, and we're going to have more wind energy to work with as well. So we got the wind energy, so that's another check mark off the list. What about moisture? Well, you got dew points that get in the low mid 60s, and usually what's ideal for severe weather is dew points north of 60, especially in the mid 60s. If you can get dew points in the mid 60s, that would be pretty good for severe weather. And you can see here, generally, I want to say probably along and west of I-75, you have dew points getting in the low to mid 60s. That's a check mark. But you actually see when you get east of I-75, especially towards far eastern Kentucky, we got dew points in the mid to upper 50s. That's not going to be favorable for severe weather. It's not going to be. And this is one of the reasons why I'm saying things are downtrending for eastern Kentucky, because number one, dew points are lower. Now, eventually, those higher dew points will make it in eastern Kentucky, but it's going to be Thursday morning by that time, and instability numbers are not going to be impressive by that time. So potential is much lower in eastern Kentucky compared to central and especially western Kentucky. So we got a check mark on the dew points. There's even an outside chance for some upper 60 dew points. If we see those, that could be quite concerning. Now let's talk about surface-based instability. This is another ingredient for severe weather. And you can see here, ideally for severe weather, you want surface-based instability values north of 1,000. And those are the areas in blue. You can see how it covers most of Kentucky. And the only exception is eastern Kentucky, where we have those lower dew points. But where we will likely see severe weather is probably areas that exceed 2,000 joules per kilogram. And you can see here, we got that kind of scattered across areas along and west of I-65. And that's where we're going to have higher confidence. But what starts to happen is you get deeper into the evening. You start to see the numbers start to drop. That means those air temperatures of the surface are starting to drop. But also, at the same time, the low pressure system that is way up in the Midwest, up towards Wisconsin at this time, is moving away. And normally, low pressure systems bring a colder air aloft. And how you get instability is that you get warm air temperatures at the surface and very cold temperatures aloft. That is where you get instability. With the surface air temperatures slowly cooling, but you also have the cold air aloft kind of moving away or trending warmer, the instability values begin to go down. So that's what you're seeing here. And this is where it brings that uncertainty of how far east these storms can be strong to severe because of the speed. It matters a lot in this setup, probably more in this setup compared to Sunday. Unlike Sunday's setup, we pretty much kept that cold air aloft throughout all night long. This time around, it's going to be moving away. So that's why there's greater confidence west of I-65 than east. It's because of how rapidly the instability values do drop. But if the storms trend faster, then that can you can expand the significant severe weather risk farther to the east. So timing is going to be very crucial, especially for central Kentucky out here. Now, it would be a different story if you get discrete supercells to form out here. Now, that would be a very different story out there, because conditions are very favorable for severe weather out here. And you can also see here, I forgot to mention this earlier, you also see these lines out here on this graphic here. Those are hodographs. And you can see one right here. Anytime we get a nice curve like this, that's an indication of strong shear. And you can see here, most of these hodographs in the warm sector show a good amount of shear. The bigger of the curvature, the more shear you have. And this will be pretty favorable for severe weather. All these hodographs you see across Kentucky will be favorable for severe weather, including tornadoes and supercells out there. Let's kind of look at some parameters here. So this is the supercell composite parameter. And this basically tells you how favorable the environment can be for supercells, especially with the combination of wind shear and instability. Numbers generally north of a 3 can be favorable for rotating thunderstorms. Big time supercells, some of the bigger ones, can be like north of a 5 or a 7. Now, if you get numbers north of a 10 for a supercell composite, I would be concerned. And you can see here, if we go to peak time heating, you can see here we got some high numbers out here, including numbers that are north of a 10. And you can see you even have some numbers up as high as 20, or maybe a little higher 20 out there. So conditions are very, very favorable for supercells, especially along and west of the 127 corridor out there. But you can also see here, this model at the same time is trying to fire up some scattered storms, near the 127 corridor. If that ends up playing out, we really got to pay close attention to those, because conditions are very favorable for supercells that can produce damaged winds, large hail, and even tornadoes. Almost a severe would be on the table if we can get discrete supercells out there. But as you can see here, as you get deeper into the evening here, those supercell composite parameter numbers start to go down, and they kind of bottom out as you get towards the wee hours of Thursday morning. There's still some instability left over, and even a decent amount of shear still out there. So some of those storms could continue even into the wee hours of Thursday morning, potentially. And here's another parameter we look at. This is the significant tornado parameter. Numbers that are higher than a 1, conditions are favorable for tornadoes. If you get significant tornado parameters of a 2 to a 3, that means conditions are favorable for strong tornadoes. And if you get numbers like up as high as like a 5 or a 6, then I would be concerned. And you can see here, we do have numbers north of a 1, especially areas along and west of the 127 corridor, even up as high as a 2 in a couple places. But look at western Kentucky, west of I-65, where we have the moderate risk out. You see significant tornado parameter numbers getting up as high as a 4 out there. And these may be a little bit conservative numbers out there. And coming from this particular weather model, other models have significant tornado parameters a little bit higher, but still, these are pretty high numbers. And this should tell you that conditions are pretty favorable for not just tornadoes, but also strong and long track tornadoes, especially west of I-65. So pretty good numbers out there. And we can get a couple of forecast soundings real quick out here. Let's go to this graphic here. I want to go back to 21Z here, and you can see our conditions, favorable for tornadoes in general. But as you get deeper in the evening, you can see how those wind shear parameters start to increase. So let's get a sounding in western Kentucky. Let's get close to Madisonville, see what we got out there. And you can see here um, we have a really nice hodograph up here, which will be favorable for supercell structures out there. When you look at the wind shear or the wind bars, you do have wind change direction with height. But here's another interesting part about this. There is notably some veer back, veer shear, which means that in the lower levels, the winds are rotating counterclockwise, but as you get into the mid levels, it's rotating in a different direction, and then you go up a little bit higher, it's back to counterclockwise. With that type of spin in the atmosphere, that can limit the strong tornado potential. Now, you can still get weaker tornadoes with that, even with veer back, veer shear, but you might be able to get away from the strong tornado potential. So the strong tornado potential might be a little bit uncertain, but either way, though, you're still talking about tornadoes out there. And if we look at the other parameters like wind shear parameters, if you remember from Sunday's event, we had SRH values, anywhere from about 100 to 200. You can clearly see the numbers are much higher for this event, anywhere from about 300 to almost 500 for storm rate of helicity values. Of course, there's plenty of instability out there. You also have lap rates that are elevated, 3 capes up to 58. So really everything is in place for severe weather, including the potential for some strong tornadoes out there based off of that sounding. If we go a little bit farther east, deeper into the warm sector, where the HER model tries to show some scattered storms or discrete storms forming, you can see here parameters are pretty similar out here. Maybe instability is a little bit lower, but you can also see here you got a really nice elevated mix layer out there, which can help increase the threat for some large hail. It can also help keep storms a little more discreet and prevent from a more messier mode. You still have a nice hodograph out there. Not really seeing veer back, veer shear on here, at least not as much. But still, you got wind change of direction with height out there. So everything is in place for severe weather. And also notably, D-Cape is up to 903, which would be favorable for damaged winds. Even with the dry air down towards the surface here, which is this area here, that's drier air, which can increase the potential for damaged winds as well. So either way, conditions are favorable for all hazards of severe weather, which would include damaged winds, could be some destructive winds out there. Large hail could be some very large hail with discrete supercells, especially west of I-65. And then tornadoes. I think we're going to see quite a few tornadoes out there. Probably more tornadoes than Sunday night. Sunday night, I think we saw 5 to 8 tornadoes. I think we may see closer to 10 to 15. But don't guarantee it on that. Could be higher, a little bit lower. May have to give or take a little bit. But I think we're going to see more tornadoes for tomorrow. So definitely stay weather aware out there. Make sure you have plans to take shelter when it's necessary. So yeah, that is Wednesday's or tomorrow's potential. Oh yeah, actually I almost forgot. This is an updraft helicity map here. And this is a very good way to look at where the strongest storms could be. You can see west of I-65, you got a lot more of those blue, orange, and even red colors, which indicates very strong storms. And this can also tell you how strong the rotating updrafts could be and where you may see most of your tornadoes. Now, not every swath of updraft helicity guarantees a tornado, but when you start to see values, get up into, the red and even the purple colors, there's a pretty good probability that's going to produce a tornado. But now, don't take the placement as it's going to be accurate. It's not going to be 100% accurate with the placement. or anything, so take the placements a grain of salt, or the exact placement. But it kind of gives you a very good idea of where the greatest potential is for significant severe weather and where areas are lower. And you can clearly see in southeastern Kentucky, you don't really see anything out there. And you can see, obviously, the greatest potential for severe weather would be west of I-65. And you can see as they get east of I-65 how they trend weaker out there. But there can still be some severe storms even east of I-65, especially up towards northern Kentucky out there. If I go back to the SPC outlook here, if we go to day 3, which is Thursday, got slackers across all of Kentucky here. Almost a severe weather could be possible once again. Thursday is going to be a more complicated setup because where most of your strong severe storms are going to be is going to be along and just south of that boundary. And where that boundary is going to sit at, it's going to be unknown probably until Thursday morning, because the storms Wednesday night is likely going to put where that boundary is going to be, and it's going to be unknown of how long Wednesday night storms are going to last out there. But as you go into day 4, which is Friday, we do have a slight risk that's out across parts of central and western Kentucky. And then on day 5, which is Saturday, we got another slight risk that is more focused south of I-64 and along and west of I-75 out there. And there could be potential for another severe weather risk on Sunday, but I think potential is too low. So we got multiple days where we may have some strong severe storms to deal with in the state of Kentucky. With all these rounds of storms coming through, obviously the next concern is going to be flooding. And honestly, the flood threat is very high later this week. This is the latest forecast from the Weather Prediction Center for rainfall. And you can see here, central western Kentucky not looking very good. Still talking about the potential for double-digit rainfall totals in western Kentucky. Could be anywhere from 10 to 12 inches of rain. And I cannot rule out some locally higher amounts. There could be some areas out there that may get at least a foot of rain by Sunday, which is just crazy to think about. But you can see the potential for 10 inches of rain could even reach into parts of central Kentucky as well. In the lower end amounts would be in southeastern Kentucky, which would be a general 1 to 4 inches. But I think the greatest concern for significant flooding is probably going to be a line from, I probably want to say southeast of Bowling Green, probably north of Somerset, maybe through Stanford, through about Richmond, up into Morehead, and probably just north of Ashland. So really north and west of this red line would be the area I'd be most concerned with the potential for significant flooding. Now the good news is that this is going to be happening over a multi-day period. This is all not going to fall one day. However, now despite that, we can still see major river flooding and even major aerial flooding. And there will be instances of flash flooding out there as well. And I'd be more concerned about the flooding later in the week, because over time, with all this rain, the grounds are going to get more and more saturated, and it's going to get to the point where it's not going to soak up any more of that rainwater, so it's going to slide off like concrete. So the flood threat is going to get higher as we go on through the week. Now this is the latest European model run through Monday morning. Lower on the amounts on this particular run compared to previous runs, but despite that, you're still talking about a widespread swath of really anywhere from 5 to 8 inches of rain, with some locally higher amounts that could be closer to 9, maybe even 10 inches of rain out there. And here's the latest run of the GFS, the American model, and very concerning look. That will lead to widespread significant flooding out there. And you can see here a lot of double-digit rainfall totals out there, especially in western Kentucky. It's showing almost 11 inches of rain for E-Town, 10.5 for Louisville, well over 13 inches for Paducah, almost 15 inches for Hopkinsville, over a foot of rain for Bowling Green. Even as you go up towards the north and northeast, Cincinnati almost 8, Maysville close to 9. I mean, these are some very concerning rainfall numbers that will likely lead to significant and even life-threatening flooding if you don't take the necessary precautions out there, especially if you live in a flood-prone zone out there. So here's a look at the excessive rainfall outlooks from the Weather Prediction Center. This is day 2, which is tomorrow. Got a moderate risk that's out for areas along and west of I-65. Slight risk includes most of central Kentucky. And as you move on to day 3, which is Thursday, we actually have a high risk for excessive rainfall or flooding for parts of western Kentucky. That includes Madisonville, Paducah, Murray, Mayfield, Fulton. So a lot of those communities out there, high risk of flooding. It's pretty rare to have a high risk on the day 3 outlook out there. And that moderate risk, it continues towards the northeast up into Louisville, even to Frankfort, E-Town, Madison. So really the areas I've been more concerned for flooding would be areas in the moderate and high risk area. Slight risk includes a good chunk of central and northeastern Kentucky for Thursday. Then day 4, which is Friday, we might be able to get a little bit of a break from the flooding. And I think the greatest potential for flooding would be more in western Kentucky. And you can see nowhere in Kentucky is in a moderate risk. It's just a marginal to slight risk out there. So Friday may not be as bad. But then as you get into Saturday, here comes the flooding risk again. Moderate risk for flooding along the west of I-65 and even up along Interstate 71 towards Cincinnati. So, yeah. And there may be another risk area for flooding even for Sunday, which this outlook does not go out through Sunday. But this should tell you here that we're going to have multiple chances for severe weather and flooding. And, yeah, it's going to be a long several days. And we'll finally get to the end of this by Monday. And really by Monday, temperatures will be much chillier, seeing highs in the 40s and 50s, and being dry. And that's what we really need after this. And it looks like next week looks to stay below normal for temperatures, but also drier for precipitation. And that's what we would really need. But yeah, it's going to be a very busy several days here in Kentucky. And we'll have more updates on this over the next few days as well, as we'll continue to track it. But anyways, guys, this all got for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Guys, like this video, hit the like button. If you really like my channel, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification so you never miss an upload. If you guys get any questions, you put a comment section down below. I'll answer you guys questions. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye and have a good day.